Government has expressed concerns over diminishing turnout at vaccination centres as numbers continue to soar. Various creative ways are being explored to try and entice South Africans to get their jabs. But does government have the constitutional muscle to make COVID-19 vaccinations mandatory? That's what we're going to discuss now with Professor Emeritus Heldon Cheadle, who is a professor in public law at the University of Cape Town. Professor Cheadle, thank you so much for your time this evening here on Newsnight. Now, simply put, you say the answer is yes, government can. Now, in the research that you've done, you point out that what doesn't help is that when government makes these kinds of decisions, there isn't a lot of transparency that is forthcoming. Why, in your opinion, do you think government has decided to rather depend on South Africans doing the right thing to get the jab?
I think there are probably very, very good policy reasons for not making it mandatory immediately. And that would obviously be because they were phasing the vaccinations in. Secondly, there wasn't certainty as to whether there would be sufficient vaccines. So, I mean, those one assumes were the policy reasons underlying it, and they seem legitimate. The purpose of the piece that I wrote with Glenda Gray was simply to say we should have an open debate now about what we need to do, and in order to open that debate, we have to really dispose and dispense with this idea that it would be unconstitutional for government to make it mandatory in many one of ways. I mean, you could make it mandatory in the sense that everyone must be vaccinated, subject to medical exceptions, of course. Or one could, under the national disaster management regulations, permit stadiums to permit, to be half filled, provided they wear masks, provided they socially distance, and they're vaccinated. So that the vaccinated can get about living the kinds of life that we lived before this pandemic.
From a legal point of view, what makes the COVID-19 vaccine, from a legal point of view, different to the vaccines that all children or babies get even before they leave hospital at the moment in South Africa?
None. It's a vaccine. And vaccines have been proved to be enormously successful. They've wiped out smallpox, they've wiped out measles, they've wiped out polio almost everywhere in the world. You know, when I was at school, there were children with polio and they had leg braces on. You don't see that today. And it's ridiculous that almost all South Africans are vaccinated. They're vaccinated against measles, against smallpox, against diphtheria. So it's, yeah. So, but of course, that has been done not through making it mandatory, but because mothers come to believe that this is the best interest of their children.
Yeah. And yet, yeah, we're sitting with a situation where one of the biggest stories this weekend was a group of people who went to protest outside one of the most important hospitals in the country to say that they don't believe in this thing, they don't believe the vaccine does what scientists say that it does. Do you believe that we are being held hostage, both constitutionally and legally, by small groups of people who have used fake news and unsubstantiated stories to try and make government think that if they made it mandatory, that they'd have some kind of political blowback?
Well, obviously, I mean, one of the freedoms that you're allowed in a constitutional democracy is to advance, causes that you believe in and deeply believe in. So I would never oppose their right to protest and their right to bring court cases against the government if it did in fact make certain aspects of its program mandatory. But then we've got courts, and the courts will decide these issues. And one thing one can be quite certain of is that the weight of the scientific evidence against what is purely anecdotal and fake news won't stand a chance in the courts.
Now, if this were to go to a court, in your opinion, what rights could justifiably be limited by a decision per se for government to say that this needs to be mandatory? Because certainly a government saying that they have the responsibility to ensure that people are safe, that they don't get sick in their numbers, and that our health system holds up far outweighs any other rights that people might think that they have in a situation like this.
Well, you've put the case really very well. So, but the two rights that I would say, or three rights that might be implicated. The first, I think, is an infringement. I think one has one's right to one's bodily integrity and autonomy. That's really a very important right if you think about women's rights around reproduction. It's very similar then that one has the right, not to have medical treatment or to or to be required to be vaccinated. So it would be an infringement of that right. It's a deeply personal right and one that is deeply associated with dignity. So you really have to have a very good case to justifiably limit it. The second right that would be implicated is the right to one's religion. I think you'd have to demonstrate that your religion actually advances this particular proposition. I might just add that, cases in the United States, don't get that far. The U.S. Supreme Court and state Supreme Courts have all upheld mandatory vaccine laws against the religious objections. And the third right is probably the right to not to be discriminated against unfairly. So the argument there is that they're being discriminated unfairly because of their beliefs, fake or otherwise. Those are their beliefs, and then they're being discriminated against. Well, that's why the Constitution uses the word unfair. So what you have to do then is to consider the fairness of the differentiation. When you don't permit somebody to come into a school, don't permit somebody to enter a restaurant without a vaccine passport. Those are the types of constitutional issues that would be engaged. And it's just so obvious that it would be fair. Because it's not only fair to the person because you're protecting them, but it's fair because you're protecting others. The table next to you or the...
Before I let you go, Professor, a big talking point, of course, is because government hasn't made this mandatory, does corporate South Africa, do business leaders have the right to insist that staff or those people that they employ get vaccinated? From a legal point of view, even though we had you on speaking about government, specifically in the public law space, would the similar legal factors come into play if something like that was ever tested in court?
Absolutely. The Occupational Health and Safety Act makes it a statutory obligation on every employer to ensure a safe and healthy workplace. and every employer must take reasonable measures. Now, can there ever be a more reasonable measure than requiring your workforce to be vaccinated, not only to protect each of themselves, but to protect each other? So, indeed, the case is much stronger in relation to the workplace because of this statutory, and in fact, it's also supported by the common law duty of employers to provide health and safety workplaces.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. Professor Emeritus Heldon Cheadle is with the Public Law Department at the University of Cape Town.